my experiences. Some of them were unpleasant at the point in time, but they became quite an interesting part later when I started looking at my personal journey. The other thing is I'm not too sure what I will teach Mike and Arun. They're elders in our country. I'm also honored to be able to actually have a talk where Justice is listening. I admire her. I know a lot about her out of personal interest, just following up her career. So thank you very much for coming. Now, just to the things that I think I've encountered that through the corporate journey that I've had, that I found very intriguing and do influence what we call the P&L in all kinds of ways. I think the first one that I'll talk about is regulation. I think regulation must be the most understated part of the corporate world. And might be it's just because of the nature of the industries I have worked in, and apologies to the doctors. I sold cigarettes for 17 years of my life. Left that and went to sell alcohol. But before that, I worked in Unilever, and there is a joke amongst my friends that I'm on my way to church, but I keep telling them I shall certainly avoid the arms category. That's not something I would be interested in doing. So regulation is one bucket, and I'll talk to you about a couple of experiences I've had. The other thing that I learned later in life, particularly when I joined Nation Media Group, is technology and how that impacts life. I will not speak about COVID, just the fact that we are not having this meeting at some hotel or at some fancy place tells us a lot about how technology is changing the world. The other thing is people, and obviously as you go around the continent, culture is a very big thing. It will not be in an orderly fashion. I'll just go through my experiences as I've gone through them, and I'll start with the one about people. I spent 5 years of my life in Zimbabwe, and when I went to Zimbabwe, it was a very pleasant place to work. Everybody followed the law. It was easy to manage the company, and things every day looked the same. And I went there in two sort of sessions. The first time I was there was at the back end of the land grab episode, and all that. I won't go into the politics, but the bottom line was Mugabe was challenged by an opposition. They tried to change the constitution, and the net result of what he did was to take the farms away from the white farmers who used to do about 40% of the forex earnings through the sale of tobacco. I was in the tobacco business, and I was managing British America tobacco there. My first experience is I was marketing director, and we started experiencing the difficulties that came. And I have this theory that in most African countries, 20 years after independence, things seem to fall apart before we seem to get our acts together. But I think the thing that I learned about in Zimbabwe was how to manage people in the case of adversity, because businesses were doing particularly badly. I was the managing director. Inflation was running at something like 6,000%. Just to give you an indication of what used to happen, I think we used to push up pricing of our products on a weekly basis. It started on a bi-weekly, ended up being weekly. And all this was to try and keep the business profitable. But I think for me, more importantly, was to try and ensure that I retained my staff, kept the talent within the group. And one morning, I used to get in fairly early. I didn't have my family with me at that point in Zimbabwe. I walked into the office, and there was this young man by the name Nyasha. I asked him, how are things? And his statement was not good. Now, for anybody who knows Africa fairly well, it's very unusual for an African to tell you things are not good, even when they are not good. And I asked him what's wrong, and it so happened that he had just pulled his kids out of school. And I went out to find out how widespread the problem was within the company. And within the staff at the bottom end of the company, probably about 20 to 30% of the people had literally pulled their kids out of school because they could not afford school fees, and we were simply not paying them enough. And I sat there and wondered, why on earth am I running an organization where people cannot send their kids to school? I think that I am who I am because my parents sent me to school, and I've got to solve this problem. The long and short of it is we did find a medium round. We were giving people fuel vouchers that they could redeem in the black market, if I may say that. And the reason I'm raising this is when I look at the values that you have as Rotarians: service, fellowship, diversity, integrity, and leadership. And the encounter in this case was, what I was doing was at the borderline of integrity. But the question for me was, do I do what I have to do to make sure that people can send their kids to school? Or do I follow the law and watch the company close down? And where does the moral line fit? The long and short of it is, we would give people loans in terms of fuel vouchers. I knew that they would sell that in the black market and get dollars. And because they could get dollars, which we were not allowed to pay our employees with, although we could import fuel, that way they would get their lives going. And by going down this route, what ended up happening is I managed to retain quite a bit of the stuff. But I think something happened in the organization. It got to the point where I could literally take them to war and they would follow me. And this thing about human beings listening to you almost blindly because they now trust you, they now are happy with the situation that you're facing, because they can live, which they were not capable of, or rather they were living fairly comfortably. Their colleagues outside our company were struggling much more. And if I think about what people are going through now, I always thank God I'm not a corporate leader during this COVID period. It is very difficult, but it is the one thing that taught me that human beings, once you earn their trust, you can take them anywhere. But how do you earn their trust? What do you do? We are facing very, very difficult times. And I can say this without any fear. Employees will see through what I call, I was going to use a four-letter word, I'll avoid that. But people can see through things that are not genuine. You've got to be very, very careful, and it's a value that I carried throughout my career. And as you lead people, you go to different countries, people think differently. It's an interesting conversation we were having a few minutes ago about the guys south of our borders, the guys east of our borders. I sometimes wonder what their conversation about us is. And that's something one has to be very, very careful. When I used to go to Ethiopia, we used to joke that the word velocity does not exist in the Amharic language because things were done slowly. We had an experience where we had a meeting, we wrote minutes, and because we were sitting at an airport, we managed to send them. And the government officials who we had that meeting rejected those minutes, said there's no chance you can do minutes that quickly. And these are a real life story. So different cultures are very different. And one has to be very circumspect about whether what we are saying or what we are doing is right. And different countries, as we speak today, are having different challenges. So I think that's one of the things that I would just like to put out there. I'll obviously take questions at the back end of that. Then the other one I'll talk about is regulation. I happen to be the managing director of Kenya breweries when they introduced excise tax on Senator. Now, many of you or many people don't realize that Senator is actually the largest brand in Kenya breweries and not Tusker. Tusker's probably Senator's double the volumes of Tusker. It might be slightly less in terms of value. But the one thing I'll always remember when I joined the organization and I was asked by my boss, what's the single biggest risk to this business? And my question was just the fact that Tusker does not pay excise duty. Now, there's a lot of other things. Pharmaceuticals are paying some degree of tax. There's food categories that attract VAT and all this. Yet we had this product that was 40% of my volumes in the second largest company on the Kenyan Stock Exchange that was not paying taxes. And I, as a Kenyan, I struggled with it. As the MD of breweries, it was good for my profit line, but I saw it as a risk. Lo and behold, about 14 months later, the same degree of excise that was put on Tusker was put on breweries. And the effect of this was we lost 90% of the Senator volumes, which you can imagine represents 30% of the P&L turnover and 40% of the volumes. We had to mothball the plant. All my sorghum farmers who used to supply at the base material, the farmers, we lost. Suddenly they couldn't sell to us. The sorghum that I had in the company, which was about 3 months supply, suddenly became about 6 years supply. All the pubs in town, the pubs were not working, and suddenly all these entrepreneurs, my distributors, came to my office and would come to see me and tell me, how do we solve this problem? And I had to go and see the PS in the Ministry of Finance. And I'll never forget, I waited for him long. It was that big. I think I waited 2 hours. I eventually saw him, and he said this statement, I think, to the point that we were talking about earlier, whether we can't enjoy wine with our alcohol. And there's a certain category that drinks Senator. They're the lower end of the consumers. And he told me, but Joe, I thought alcohol was the demand was inelastic. And I told him, yes, it is. The people who are drinking are still drinking. They're just not drinking what we sell. Now, many people don't realize that the size of the illicit alcohol market in Kenya is as big as the legal market. So the challenge and the encounter in that situation was one decision that was taken overnight. And I'm sure people like Arun, who've been around since the days of price control, are alive to this fact that a simple decision taken in parliament could easily affect what it is that you had to do. The long story of it is I did leave the organization before we resolved the issue completely, but the taxes were, what's the phrase? The level of taxes were reduced, and the business has slowly crawled back, although it has taken time. But from a corporate point of view, it was a very, very difficult time for me. It was probably the one time I really did not have an answer. Everybody on the outside thinks that you know it all, but I had a team. We eventually worked through this, and regulation in that thing affected my business quite a lot. As I told you earlier, I worked in BAT, British America Tobacco, for 17 years of my life. Regulation was the name of the game. And it was a very interesting organization because when I joined the organization, there used to be lots of denial about whether cigarette smoking is harmful to your health. And by the time I was leaving, it was an accepted fact even internally that cigarettes smoking was harmful for your health, and that's how I ended up moving from general management into corporate affairs and regulation, and that's where I cut my teeth as far as that subject is concerned. But I think too many of us who run businesses ignore that fact, and I think as Arun, sorry, I'm mentioning your name quite a bit. I ended up joining Kenya Association of Manufacturers just for this particular reason, to give you the opportunity to go into government, influence policy, accept what society is saying, because I personally think that regulation is necessary. I think products like tobacco, if they are to be sold, they need to be regulated. If pharmaceuticals are regulated, there's no reason why tobacco should not be regulated. Alcohol should be regulated, and that's a major part of life. The third one that I just want to talk about briefly is my life in media. I think that's was probably one of the most interesting experiences running Nation Media Group. And I'll just avoid the politics for today. The politics of our country are obvious, but as you sit there and you run the organization in every election year, every election cycle, you have to deal with the issues that we have to face. I had the privilege, as I say, of having 2 elections in 1 year, which they told me, I remember Mr. Kiboro, the chairman, told me that's highly unusual. But I think the biggest challenge, and it is a challenge that I'll raise with the Rotary, because the Sergeant at Arms was talking about introducing younger people. But the one thing that I did learn is about 19% of, 50% of the Kenyan population is under the age 19. I think in Tanzania the percentage is slightly higher. It's about 55. Uganda is about 60. It's a much younger population. We all spend a lot of our time looking at our WhatsApp messages. And if I ask what's the average number of words in a WhatsApp message, it's probably might be 10 max and a picture, and we get the message. Yet media spends a lot of time writing 600 word articles with a punchline at the back end of the story, and hoping that these youngsters are going to read these things. You will not, and it's a simple reality of life, they will not pay attention to you if you don't talk the language in the manner that they appreciate it and the way they understand it. The reality is media consumption for what people like us who still look at the newspaper is on a decline. But the big moral question is, and I define journalism slightly differently from media. Journalism is all about public good, and I think it's Rashmi who brought this to my attention. That when you start talking about the arguments about public good, and Mike, you're here. I am on the KEPSA forum, and I always get interested when I see you people talking about the focus and negativity of media, and I do worry when professionals actually expect the media to be writing positive things that would, and I get why they're saying that. Being negative is a tiring thing, but I can tell you, having worked with journalists, that they've got this thing called public interest, and you can go and have a look at the website of what the public interest is defined by them. But the one thing I am certain about is, if media did not exist, who will look after the less fortunate? Who will talk about the things that don't work for them? The problem is, with the media business model as it exists today, it makes no money. And the challenge, therefore, is how do you have an organization that generates cash, through whichever means, because the current model is not working, and the challenge, therefore, is how do you have an organization that generates cash through whichever means, because the current model is not working, that would help fund what you call good journalism, whether it's negative from the perception of the consumers or the general business leaders, because I think a lot of the private sector business leaders have their heads buried about their organizations to the exclusion of what's happening to the average person in the street. And I hold that view very, very strongly. And it's something that one needs to think about whenever we are watching journalism in its current form being decimated, because media houses are clearly struggling to fund that activity. News collection is the most expensive thing and most unprofitable thing I learned to manage. But how do we keep, for those of us who've been in this country for a long time, we watched media fighting for our rights, multipartyism, and all that. How do you keep the media on that path to ensure that public good is maintained while it you find a profitable way? I think the challenge is there for those of the people who are still in the media. I do participate, but if you look at all the things that I've spoken about, the cultural context on where you'll talk about how technology will affect us. I mean, there are people who still cannot understand that in the new world, we might be going to church using Zoom for a long time. I think it's not going to change. Are we going to change our culture? Is it acceptable? I mean, I speak to a lot of elderly people who are very upset at the fact that they cannot go to church. Some of them is part of my own family, but that's the way of the world. But the other thing that I did realize, I did go for an Oracle conference in San Francisco about 4 years ago, and I had the privilege of meeting Larry Ellison. And Larry said some things to me that were a bit mind-boggling, and I'm still trying to get my head around them. But I think with COVID, some of these things are becoming clear. One of them he said was that if you have no basic ability to program, in the next 10 to 15 years, you will be considered illiterate. We still teach our kids how to read and write in the old-fashioned way. And he was challenging that statement. And I remember him telling me that when they started this whole thing of cloud computing, everybody thought they were crazy. Today, big governments are putting stuff on the cloud, and the world is moving on. We older guys are worried about security, but the youngsters are continuing. The other thing that he put to me, and I looked at him at the end of this statement, he said that he reckons that in the next 10 years, basic medication, you should be able, it will be technically possible. Whether human beings can do it is a slightly different thing. But he was saying that you should be able to use algorithms to get basic medical treatment. So I was telling him, are you telling me that the GP will not be useful? He said, you give me an answer to that if you're still alive. But he says that the way technology is going, those are the kind of things they are thinking about. And the reason I raise this is because I was in an industry that was shrinking, and everybody else in their comfort zones were telling me, well, you guys are not being innovative. And my pushback and my challenge to society today is, I think COVID has really, really opened our eyes to how things can change. And if we're not very careful, some of our businesses or some of our professions will be done radically differently. I am aware it's 1:44. I know the cutoff time was supposed to be 2. I can stop there and take questions rather than continue talking about my encounters, and I'll bring my experiences as we go along.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was quite enlightening. And I now request Rotarians and guests to kindly inbox any questions. The first question we have is from our very own Rotarian, Dr. Beatrice Kiptanui. The question for you, Mr. Muganda, is as follows. Would you say that failure of systems leads to compromise in leadership? Or does compromised leadership lead to failure of systems, particularly in our region? And as we wait for more questions, I've seen that we have a gentleman who has raised his hand. Mr. Michael Hopkins, you have a question?
Oh, well, thank you very much. And excellent talk, Joe. Really enjoyed it, and your style is superb. It captures one's attention. I wanted to ask you a question about British American tobacco, if I may. It so happened 15, 20 years ago, I worked also in British American tobacco as an advisor to their corporate social responsibility program. And the CSR program of BAT was one of the best in the world. And in fact, we used it as part of our teaching for many years. And even today, I use part of it. As you know, CSR is not, I don't mean CSR charity, I mean CSR as a way of running a business, treating all your stakeholders responsibly. And so I learned a lot from British American Tobacco. But giving a lecture, frequently I get asked, how could you be socially responsible, teach about social responsibility, but yet work for a company like British American Tobacco? What would your response be to that, Joe?
Could I start with yours? I mean, having run many companies across the country about BAT, I naturally got asked that question. And my view, I suppose everybody has to take a point of view as to what you're going to, how you're going to lead your life. And my view was always that, look, it's not an illegal outfit. And then on the back of the fact that it's not legal, one has to take a moral judgment as to whether you're going to do it. Now, if it's going to be done, because it is being done, how then do you decide you're going to do it? And that's where this issue about corporate social responsibility came. And I think to your point about doing it in a manner that treats your stakeholders in a sort of fair manner. Not everybody will agree, and I learned to accept that. There will be those who will tell you you're a bad person. I learned to accept that. But I personally could live with it, and I had a 17-year career at BAT, and I personally have no, what do I call it, no regrets about it. Would I encourage my kids to go into it as a standard test? The answer would be yes, so long as they are following the laws of the land. If the product does get banned, because it might get banned, then so be it. You have to live with the consequences. That would be my response to that. But it's a question. It's in my view, it's a personal choice one makes as to whether you're going to work for that organization or not, because that question will be asked, and it will be asked repeatedly. And I still get asked the question many years after I've left the organization. To the earlier question about does systems compromise leadership or leadership compromise systems, I think for me it's a fairly straightforward thing. I think that leaders compromise systems. It's not systems that compromise leaders. Ultimately, the human being must take a view as to what they are going to do. If you think back to our forefathers who fought for our independence, did they compromise on their lives and their beliefs to fight for what it is that we are enjoying today? No. Did they die? Yes, they did. And I think it's that tough, difficult space of sacrifice that we tend to avoid as we ask this question. So in my mind, it's very, very clear that if you make the decision that you want to be a leader, please be ready to deal with the consequences that you have. When you read history and you look about world wars and why people fight for things, it's simply because of beliefs, and it's not about systems. Systems are managed by human beings. More questions?
President Ritesh, with your permission, can I ask a question?
Ritesh, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, we have past President Mike, who has a question, as well as President-elect Gideon.
I think Mike can go first. Or can I go first, President Ritesh?
Yes, please.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Great.
I can go first?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was really good, Joe. Our best and most stimulating talk for a long time in our club, and we have lots of good ones. This one of the media and negativity, it's complex, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And of course, there is the public good. It's the conscience of the people, the fourth estate. But we all have experiences. I know I do. My wife Evelyn does, from when she was chairman of Transparency International. John Ngumi talks about his from time to time on the KEPSA WhatsApp group. And this is where it's not the public good. It's selecting, spinning stuff in order to generate sensation and to earn the right to the individual journalist to get space and headlines that hopefully will sell papers. And my question actually is this very challenging one for the board and senior management, vis-a-vis editors, vis-a-vis the journalists themselves, as to this balance of oversight and influence to ensure, to use your words, the trusted, the genuine nature of the stories. Because when we have too many of these examples of people selecting a story, not giving the right of genuine reply, that's what we complain about, I think, on the KEPSA group, other than the business of always bad news and then the international media read it and don't invest, etc. And the other one, of course, is we're back now to the Ruto Raila on page 1 of every newspaper, ostensibly because that's what sells, which isn't necessarily public good. So this melange of complicated issues that are, I know, so challenging to people who were at your level and at the board. How do you comment on all of this?
I think there are two things. I fully agree, especially when you start talking about the politics. I shared your view. I had exactly your view as to how much prominence do you give it on the paper. And it was an interesting thing. In my early days, I challenged them very hard and they pulled it out. And the funny thing is, Mike, the sales actually did go down. So that's the strange thing about Kenyans. If you take politics out of the paper, the reality is they don't buy the paper as much as they can, and that is something that it's a Kenyan consumer thing. You don't see a lot of it outside necessarily this country, even in
Except
Tanzania.
America.
In America, yeah, the answer is yes, it's correct. But if you look at the style of writing is a little bit more nuanced than I think it is in Kenya. In Kenya, it's fairly straightforward. One guy did this, the other guy said this, and we can reduce.
Yeah.
I used to say, if I bought a house in Lavington, the editors had the capability of reducing it to a political story. So I do share your view. As far as the issue of right of reply, I think you are right. But I do this privately. I don't necessarily take it on the KEPSA board. I think that the corporate leaders are shy to reply to issues that they raise. And sometimes, and I not always, John is a different character. He will raise his takes, and he's happy if you give him the opportunity to make sure that you do get a response. But I think it's fair, and I think we tried as much as we could to make sure that people have right of reply. And I had to discipline quite a number of journalists about that, because it's a wall, it's an opinion piece, everybody has the right. And if you're going to ruin somebody's reputation, I think it's very important they get this opportunity, because Kenyans have this, especially when you go out into the rural area where they say it was in the nation and therefore it's true. So it is very easy to ruin people's reputations. And if you're going to do that, please make sure that you are talking to the people who have a slightly different view. And I can tell you, Mike, we've challenged people. I have given space to people when I was running the nation for people to write, and people would simply back off. It's not the right thing to do if you asked me, but we did try, and I still speak to the editors quite a lot. I don't know whether Pamela has managed to get onto the call, but I do speak to the editors quite a lot about this subject. But broadly speaking, you're not wrong. I also get tired of the politics on the paper. And you're right that everybody should be given the right to respond, especially if it's a very damaging story. It's simpler with companies, much harder with individuals.
Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Joe Muganda. We will take one more question from Rotarian Gideon Akwabi, our President-elect. But what I'll request is, since we have to close the official meeting, I'll read out the questions and comments, and we will have Ambassador Josephine do the vote of thanks. And thereafter, if you're willing to stay on just for about 10 minutes longer to answer the questions which I'll read out. Is that okay?
That's all right. That's all right.
So, Rotarian Gideon.
Thank you, President Ritesh, and excellent talk, Joe. I worked at Nation newspapers when print was the biggest. Actually, it was the only source of income through advertising. Way back in 1994, 1995, we launched the East African. And increasingly, we've seen print come down. At the time, I think we were doing about 400,000. I can remember when Masinde Muliro died, we did 400,000. On the night Jaramogi Oginga Odinga died, we did about 400,000. I can remember it was 20th of January 1994. I can't forget. But increasingly, I'm told this thing has come down to about 40,000 print order for the Daily Nation. And I think.
Sorry if I may just comment. I just think the 40,000 is because of COVID, but the numbers are hovering at around 90 to 100,000. Sorry for interrupting you.
Okay. Is it because print media has suffered from lack of media portability? You'd find that we have radios now on phone. We can watch news on phone. And until we can find that link of transferring media, print media to the phone where somebody can read at his comfort. Yes, I know there is an effort by all print media, major newspapers worldwide to convert revenue from subscription. But that doesn't seem to have done well with the younger generation globally. And probably we need to find new ways to see how we can have that media portability. Thank you.
I think Gideon, you're very right. I think the mistake that is made is people equate journalism to newspaper. And I think that's wrong. To me, the newspaper is a medium like the TV or the, the TV, the radio, the cell phone and everything. In fact, I was sitting in the editorial meeting at the New York Times, and they were not speaking about the headline. That was the interesting thing. They were looking at the picture that is going to go out into the mobile phone and what the caption will be. So, and obviously the consumption habit has changed. But I think what has happened is a lot of the journalists have gotten stuck to the fact that their output will end up in a newspaper. And that's the skill set that, as you say, we have to find that portability. And I tell you, it was a very, very big challenge to get people to get to understand that, because the reality is 75% of the Kenyan consumer is under the age 35. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about alcohol, you're talking about cars or whatever. That is the major person you have to be selling your product to. And if you don't do that, because I used to tell them that ultimately the consumer is the consumer. If they're not interested in your product, you can shout and say how important it is. It doesn't.
I believe we have lost Mr. Joe.
I think you lost airtime.
I see. Well, I believe.
Mr. President, did you send him longer points or did you send him airtime?
Actually, no, we did not. We did not send any bonga points or airtime. Yes, thank you, Past President Kamal. Rotarian Rashmi, I'll request you to kindly follow up and check if our guest speaker is all right. In the meantime, since we will require a guest speaker to be present for the vote of thanks by Ambassador Dr. Josephine, will it be okay with everyone if I conclude the meeting for today? And we'll wait for the guest speaker to be back so Ambassador Josephine can have her word of thanks. So today for our meeting, we've had an outstanding attendance, and I thank all the visiting Rotarians and guests. We've had international visiting clubs: Rotary Club of New River, Onslow, North Carolina; Rotary Club of Madras, District 3232; Rotary Club of Bangalore, Raj Mahal Villas, District 3190; Rotary Club of New Kent, Virginia, District 7600. We've had a total of 7 international visiting Rotarians. From District 9212, we've got President Sarah Migwi from Rotary Club of Langata. We've got visiting Rotarians from Rotary Club of Langata, Nairobi Thika Road, Embu, Lavington Gioni, Thika, and Kirinyaga. Rotary clubs of Nairobi Central, Parklands, and Kampala City, Uganda. I'd like you to kindly put your hand to your chest or raise a glass and to Rotary the world over.
Rotary the world over.
World over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe is back.
Joe is back. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
I've had to join using my cell phone.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us again. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Hello.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like? I'll request if it's okay, and I can read out some questions and comments, and perhaps you would like to take note of them. As you're contemplating on the answers, we will request Ambassador Josephine Ojiambo to kindly give the vote of thanks. And thereafter, with your permission, we can have a 10-minute session whereby you can answer the questions. Is that all right?
That's all right.
Perfect. So I'm going to read out the questions and comments. The first question is from Rotarian Nikhil Raj, who says, looks like disruptions are going to reformat many industries. Any points on how to adapt? The next question is from Juliet To Himina from Rotary Club of Nairobi Thika Road. I work in the media industry and would like your pointers on the future of media. What possible innovations are needed to navigate the dying traditional media model we are in? The third question is from Rotarian Nicodemus Chege, who says, sorry, kindly mute. So the next question from Nicodemus Chege is as follows. Having worked across various industries in Africa, what would you say is the current and future place of ethics and integrity as far as corporate and public governance is concerned? The next question is from Mr. George Kazungu. You walk around Nairobi and you see rot and rust everywhere. You see pseudo dump sites everywhere. Roads we spent billions on have developed cracks and side rails are missing and nobody seems to care. The city seems to be turning into one big slum. What management advice can you give to our government and us to better manage our resources? And number two, with your extensive travel around Africa, what do you think can be done to stop wars and revamp economic growth in the continent? A wonderful comment by Justice Joyce Oluoch. Great talk from you, Joe. You have a wealth of experience having worked in the corporate sector for many years. From Dr. David Gitanga, great presentation today. And must be done again. I believe those are the questions for the time being. And whilst you contemplate on the answers, I'll request Ambassador Dr. Josephine Ojiambo, our Vice President, to kindly give a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, President Ritesh. Dear Rotarians from the international setting and our local Kenyan setting, Rotaractors, friends, and guests, it's indeed a great honor to propose a vote of thanks to all who have helped make this fellowship such a resounding success. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Nairobi, therefore, I'd like to propose a hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Mr. Joe Muganda, for being present to grace our fellowship and share with us insights and reflections on his encounters as a leader. Mr. Muganda, we are grateful that you gave us such an insightful and thought-provoking address on what it means to be an all-rounded leader. Your years of experience as a transformative leader in the corporate world give credence and are a living testament to true leadership. What struck me most amongst your reflections were that, one, you underpin across all your reflections cross-cultural communication, regulation, oversight, and stewardship. When you reflected on Zimbabwe, you spoke on managing people and managing sales. When you reflected on BAT, you said, tongue-in-cheek, it's not the legality of what you do, but how you do it. And then you said, if the product is banned, then so be it. And then you came to Kenya Breweries and made a comment which I'm sure our Cabinet Secretary, Health, might want to hear. You said, the people who drink are still drinking. They're just not drinking what we sell. Perhaps you might say, they're not drinking where we think they are. And then on the media, you spoke about the future of the media and reflected on it as a public good. And you also talked on COVID-19 and presented it as a possible opportunity in transformative leadership. Thank you so much. We're also very grateful to Rotarian Rashmi for inviting Mr. Muganda and making this discussion possible for us all. So I'd like to end by thanking everyone on our call this afternoon for taking the time to join us in our Rotary Club of Nairobi Fellowship. I wish you all a wonderful and blessed afternoon. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Dr. Josephine. And thank you so much to Mr. Joe Muganda for taking time out to grace this occasion to actually speak to us today and share with us such wonderful insights. We are truly very grateful, and I hope you have received a memento from the club, a certificate, and a cup in which you can, wonderful, in which you can have your coffee. Thank you. Thank you. And we have one further question from Dr. Margareta Vagasheru. Dr. Margareta, would you kindly unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, thank you so much, Joe. You enlightened us and entertained us really well. I'm sorry we didn't have more time with you. I just wanted to be a snoop and ask why you have left us at Nation Media. We will miss you, your leadership especially. So why did you leave?
I'd like not to answer that question, to be honest.
Yes, I know. Too bad. You're
it's
cornered.
Too bad. But let me put it this way. It was personal. I was not in a good space personally. I hope you can interpret what that means. And I took the decision to look after myself.
Oh, we will miss you.
Yeah, I think I left the job, might be 24 months too early.
Oh, well, thank you for your service while you were there.
Okay.
Thank you. And we have just one further question from, two further questions. One is from past President Arun Devani, and the other one is from past President Kamal Sanghani.
Joe, it was fantastic listening to you. The energy you come out with is always inspiring. Joe, I have two questions. One, with the COVID and the effect of it, and you just now mentioned the drop in sales of Business Daily, which in my opinion is one of the few newspapers I enjoy reading. Takes 15, 20 minutes, but I get good cover. How is COVID going to affect people's thinking? Because as it is, we would be getting, we are not too sure which part of the news is origin or which part is fake. Previously, we all used to get together either in a bar or a pub or a social function, and we could exchange out and discuss out openly and give our thoughts whether it was a true news or a false news. How will this affect the population in time to come? The second question, and this is where you and I interacted on the KM platform, what we noticed is we all know what is right and what is wrong and what is not going right. But when it comes to lobbying, perhaps you have seen at KEPSA, there are not more than 180 to 2 people who are passionate and who try and devote their time, etc. At CAM, maybe 70 to 80 people. What is it that we shy off in saying our minds and preparing and telling the people in power what is right and what is wrong, or what may be the right way, which will take us forward and improve our life? I would be very curious to listen to your views.
Can I start? And I'll start trying to answer Arun's questions. I think, Arun, the problem, and you're right. I mean, I think too many of us are too scared to talk about what we have to talk about. And the simple phrase, and John Gumi at KEPSA uses it a lot, truth to power. And I think too many of us are in it. I'm sorry to say, we hope that everybody else will solve our problem, and we'll sit at the back. And I'll give you an example, was the plastics one. I think the trouble in our country is not so much the fact that things have to change. It's how we change them. I mean, the decision on the plastics, I don't think was 100% of a surprise, but the day it was implemented, the effect that it has on jobs, if you're going to change your machinery, it takes you 24 months, and people don't seem to care about the livelihoods that we are affecting. And too often in our country, we seem to just, our solution to everything, Arun, is write a new law. And probably for me, that's the most frustrating thing that I could ever have. And it's not just writing a new law. If we say we are going to do public participation, people find the easiest possible way of ensuring public participation is done, and that's why there's a Umtata ends up winning 1,000 and 1,000,000 cases in court. We have to be honest if we want to change things. Now, are we brave enough? I think there are people who are brave. We did not get into multi-party democracy by sheer luck, but you've got to get to the right people. Too often, I think we leave lobbying at very, very junior levels, and everybody runs away by saying it's not my responsibility. And I don't think, Arun, I'm answering your question, but I said something earlier: sacrifice, conviction. What you people were doing when you were fighting. I remember I was a young manager in the days when price control was there. And your generation fought very, very hard, speaking to the right people all the time. Multi-party democracy did not come on a silver platter. And we must have some of these difficult conversations. Will people suffer? I think yes. And if we are thinking that it's not going to happen the hard way, I think one of the things that COVID has managed to do is find us half asleep. And the realities of what needs to be done must be done. We must listen to our doctors, they're there. And we must pay attention if we are going to get this thing working. And simply going and I'm sorry to say this, although I believe it's a private sort of discussion, simply making announcements about the number of people who have fallen sick is not going to help. I've been affected personally. I've had a close friend who's been affected, and when you see the pain and suffering, we have to get our act up together and be honest in everything we do. I don't think I've answered your question, Arun, but we've got to be braver, and we've got the 70 or so people I think can make a difference. I'm absolutely convinced. The effect of COVID thinking in the short term and fake news. I think the youngsters are a very different breed from us, and I think we need to spend a lot more time trying to figure them out. You know, Arun, these days we have people who go out to deliberately spread propaganda, and the problem is, and I mean negative propaganda, the problem is social media is a cheap, effective way of allowing them to do it. As I was leading nation, and the other thing is everybody has an opinion of everything, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. So we have to have our filters up in our organizations, and I think the more younger people we have wherever we work, the more we will get to understand what these guys are looking for. But I can tell you, they're very short-term minded. They get bored very easily, and are not going to be working in one organization for as long as we used to. And those are things we have to just be alive to the fact, and that's the way they work. They're not as loyal as our generation tended to be. I don't think I've been the most loyal employee personally, but I think they have taken one up on me.
Joe, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
This is Kamal Sangani.
Yes.
See, after a long time, my friend, you still haven't lost weight, but it's good to see you're keeping healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Yep.
I think that you haven't lost the Tusker touches yet.
I'm not drinking much of it anymore.
Joe, I think you've hit some of the subjects right on the head. And I think you need to do a paper for the Ministry of Health. They need somebody like you. no doubt the CS is doing a great job as to what he's doing, but I still feel his handlers are not pushing him in the right direction. And I think we as the private sector need to sort of push that in. And it seems that you are one of them. You put Vivo in the right direction when they were losing their ground. Same with Tusker, East African Breweries. You said that comment about Tusker and Senator. And also Nation Media Group. But talking about Nation Media Group, just for the benefit of those who are listening, when I was the president in 2014 and 2015 of this great club, we had signed, or rather we had an understanding with your then CEO, Tom Mushindi, that they will support us in our projects. But then over the line, we lost somehow. So I think I will ask the president to tap into your contact list and then push us back into that category to see how we can come back in. I know you, as you said, you left them, but your touch is still there. You're still in their roll call as a great staff. But it's nice if you can help us out. But more than anything, I just wanted to make a comment and say that it's nice to see you, my friend. Regards to the madam and to your family, and let's keep in touch.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm still involved in a lot of things privately, so through KM, through KEPSA, I still do get involved in trying to put our country right. I only have one country, like most of you, and we're doing that. If I may just go through a couple of questions that I'd received earlier. As far as the rot dump sites and what can be done, I think we are beginning to see some offshoots. I mean, I went into town a couple of days ago and I was pleasantly surprised. So I think if what we are having at, is it called the Nairobi Metropolitan Service, continues around the country, or at least around Nairobi, we will be onto a good thing. I think anybody who's been involved in water will know that things have improved quite dramatically ever since they took over. So there is some offshoots, but the absolute reality is we will have to do it ourselves. If we don't do it, we'll suffer the consequences. And the other question was about the African continent. I think the more I go around the African continent, it's chalk and cheese, depends on which country you go to. Of late, I've not been traveling quite a bit, but I personally have a lot of hope in the younger people. I think they're much more daring, and they're going to do their bit. If they don't, as I always say, nobody is going to come to your country to fix it for you. And it's one of the biggest reasons I came back home. I had the opportunity of living overseas, but I say if I don't come back home and fix my own country, nobody will do it for us. It's an ism, as I always say it, but it's an absolute reality of the way the world is. And I'm sorry if I'm not answering some of the questions definitively, because the questions in reality are philosophical and we can have a long debate about which way to go. But the only thing that I'm certain about is the rest of the guys around the world are not any cleverer than us. It's more about values than education. The other thing is ethics and integrity in corporate governance. Does it have a place? I think I've just spoken about it. If you don't have values, you will not have ethics. If you don't have ethics, don't be surprised that there is no water in your tap. It's as simple as that. It's not terribly complicated. Sometimes we overcomplicate it too much. As far as the other question about pointers as to where the future of media is, I think media has a big place. I think media has not disappeared. The format has changed. What has really changed is the fact that the business model that we had that made profit while doing it in the old way is what is gone. And I think that's gone forever. The media practitioners will have to learn new skills. Anybody who believes that, I remember telling Tom Mushindi one day that in my early days at Nation, that the newspaper must be the only product in the world that people buy and do not consume 100% of it. And he looked at me completely bewildered, saying, "What do you mean?" I asked him, "How much of the newspaper do you read?" And he says, about 20-30%. And I said, another group is interested in 20-30%. And over a period of time, that mesh and mesh has allowed the economics to work. Technology today allows us to go straight into the article that we read. Media practitioners are soon going to be paid by the number of clicks that they are getting in the, as far as their journalism is concerned. The kids think that once they have their telephone, they're good. I don't know what it will look like in the next 2 to 3 years, but it's a completely new skill set. We have to be less wordy. We have to draw a lot of pictures, and we just have to be alive to the way technology is dealing with us. If we are not, we will die. And that then goes to the